Money doesn't change you, it just hands you the mic. That's the unsettling truth. People think wealth transforms a person, but in reality, it just turns up the volume on who they already were. What they feared, what they wanted, what they felt entitled to. Money strips away constraints, not just financial ones, but social ones too. And without those limits, your internal architecture spills out into the world, loudly. Think of it like this. Imagine every person is a house. Poor or broke, you're inside a locked room with curtains drawn. Nobody sees much. Even you can only access certain floors. But give someone money, and suddenly every door unlocks. The curtains lift, the basement, the attic, the broken staircase. It's all visible. Wealth doesn't redecorate the house. It reveals what was always inside. If that hit a nerve, you're in the right place. Like, subscribe, and send this to someone who keeps saying money changes people. It doesn't. It exposes them. And what you're about to hear will shift the way you see wealth, character, and yourself. Let's keep going. Let's start with an example that's easy to stomach. A man wins the lottery. Overnight, he has $50 million. He quits his job, buys 5 cars, and starts ghosting friends. Family says he changed. But what if he didn't? What if he always fantasized about being unreachable, being envied, being the center of gravity in every room? He just never had the funds to act on it. This is the lie we tell ourselves. If I had more money, I'd be more generous, more calm, less anxious, more myself. But statistically, most people who come into sudden wealth become more paranoid, more isolated, more obsessive, not less. Why? Because money removes friction. It doesn't add character, it just exposes the one you already had. Let's go deeper. There's this idea in psychology called value-congruent behavior, the concept that people behave in ways that align with their internal value system. But money complicates that, because when you're broke, your behavior is filtered by necessity. When you're rich, your behavior is filtered by desire. And desire is where your real values live, stripped of performance. Watch how someone spends their first million. That's their religion. You'll see it in the ones who immediately buy symbols, status cars, watches, designer labels. They're not bad people, they're just worshiping something. Approval, control, maybe revenge, maybe validation, but it's worship nonetheless. Because when you finally can do anything, what you choose to do is sacred. We think money makes people greedy, but greed was already in the system. It just hadn't been activated, like a dormant virus. It was waiting for access, and access is what money grants, not just to yachts or properties, but to versions of the self that were too expensive to animate before. Let's make this personal. Ask yourself, when you fantasize about being rich, what does your mind jump to? Is it security, power, dominance, escape? Is it a quiet home or an expensive flex? Are you imagining being loved or being envied? These questions matter because they expose your emotional skeleton. We're taught to see wealth as a tool, a neutral amplifier, but it's not neutral, it's reactive. It fuses with your self-concept like gasoline hitting fire. If you're insecure, money will deepen that insecurity. You'll need louder signals, bigger gestures, flashier proofs. If you're afraid of abandonment, you'll hoard wealth like it's armor. If you're obsessed with freedom, you'll chase money endlessly, only to realize you've enslaved yourself to it. Here's a chilling fact. Studies show that as people climb income brackets, their capacity for empathy tends to decline. Not because money erases compassion, but because wealth often rewards detachment. You stop depending on people. You outsource care. You insulate yourself from the frictions that build connection. And slowly, the human parts of you begin to rot in silence. Wealth doesn't make you evil, but it makes it easier to stop noticing when you are. Look at people in positions of extreme power, billionaires, CEOs, monarchs, old money dynasties. Their scandals don't come out of nowhere. They're slow leaks from a container that was never sealed right to begin with. The problem wasn't money. The problem was that nobody around them could say stop. Money builds echo chambers, Not just around you, but inside you. Let's go darker. There's something especially uncomfortable about how money rewires shame. For most people, shame is social. It keeps you in check. But with enough wealth, shame becomes optional. You can pay for privacy, buy silence, settle suits, isolate yourself from reflection. That's the transformation people talk about. But it's not really transformation, it's decay. And you don't need to be a millionaire to see this happening. Even small upgrades in wealth can expose it. You get a raise, and suddenly you're more judgmental of people struggling. You pay off your debt, and now you talk about financial discipline like you invented it. You forget who you were before you had options. And the worst part is, you think this new version is the real you. But it isn't. It's just the version you could afford to become. Money is not neutral. It's a truth serum. It tells the world what you really care about, what you really think you deserve, what you're still trying to heal, even if you pretend you've already moved on. And if you're not careful, it will turn your unresolved needs into your personality. The world doesn't need more rich people. It needs people who face the mirror before they bought a better one. So no, money doesn't change you. It reveals you. The question is, are you ready to see who's underneath?
There's a saying in addiction psychology. Every craving is a memory, something unresolved, something you didn't get, something you're still trying to feel. We rarely apply that lens to money, but we should. Because wealth isn't just numbers, it's emotion, it's history. And the way you pursue money, what you do with it once you have it, usually points back to something that went missing a long time ago. Money doesn't make people greedy. It makes them nostalgic for needs they couldn't name. Let's take a closer look. Imagine two people. Both grew up in poverty. One now hoards cash, terrified of spending even a cent unless it's productive. The other spends wildly. Lavish dinners, designer brands, impulsive trips, because it feels like a rebellion. Same origin, opposite behaviors. Why? Because money is a mirror. But it reflects not just identity, it reflects memory and trauma and longing. What you crave when you finally get rich is often what you were emotionally deprived of when you were poor. Validation, control, belonging, safety, admiration, power. And here's the twist. The more intense the craving, the more invisible the wound. You won't even realize you're chasing a phantom. You'll just feel like it's finally your time, like you deserve this, like you've earned the right to silence your inner child by feeding them gold. But children don't need gold. They need to be seen. And that's the problem. Most people aren't using money as a tool. They're using it as a time machine, a way to rewrite their past, to win battles that already ended, to finally become the version of themselves that might have been safe, wanted, worthy. It's heartbreaking, and it's everywhere. That's why financial success doesn't always bring peace. In fact, it usually doesn't, because instead of healing your hunger, money often just gives it a new language. You don't feel safe, you feel expensive. You don't feel loved, you feel followed. You don't feel real, you feel recognized. There's a difference. Let's get specific. A woman grows up feeling unseen, ignored by her family, invisible in school. She works hard, builds a six-figure income, and spends aggressively on luxury skincare, curated outfits, and lifestyle aesthetics. She tells herself she loves beauty, but deep down, she's trying to become visible, desirable, valid. A man grows up under constant control, strict rules, unpredictable punishments, no privacy. He gets rich, and suddenly he's obsessed with passive income, early retirement, total autonomy. It's not about money, it's about escaping surveillance, finally feeling untouchable. Another person grows up with nothing but chaos, unstable housing, financial panic, constant moves. As an adult, he gets his first real money, and spends every cent on ultra-minimalist decor, clean lines, silence, white walls. It looks like taste, but it's therapy. These aren't conscious choices. That's what makes them dangerous. Because when you don't recognize your emotional blueprint, it controls your financial architecture. You'll build a life around needs you can't name. You'll sabotage stability because you mistake it for stagnation. Or you'll chase luxury thinking it's self-love, but it's not. It's projection. And projection is exhausting. It's how we end up in this weird loop where more money leads to more spending, more anxiety, more comparison, more striving. Because the thing we're feeding isn't our life, it's our emotional ghost.
Here's where it gets existential. Desire is rarely about the object. It's about what the object symbolizes. You don't want a designer bag. You want status, approval, a signal that you made it. You don't want a beach house. You want freedom, control over time, proof that you're not trapped anymore. You don't want a high-income job. You want to silence the voice that told you you'd never be enough. Desire is a mirror, but a warped one. Because when the real need is emotional, physical wealth can't satisfy it. It just keeps you distracted. That's why people chase the next level, the next milestone, the next flex. Not because they're greedy, but because the ghost isn't full yet. And it never will be. Not with money. This isn't just personal, it's societal. Look at how culture rewards overachievement. We're constantly fed stories of people who came from nothing and now live in excess. But behind every rags to riches story, there's usually a person who hasn't stopped running. Someone who's still afraid that if they slow down, they'll feel poor again. Not financially, but emotionally. Here's the harsh truth. If your self-worth was built on escaping poverty, you'll never stop running, even after you're rich. Because in your nervous system, you're still in the fire. The bank account changed, the emotional setting didn't. That's what makes financial healing so tricky. It's not about budgeting or investing or leveling up. It's about naming the ghost. It's about asking yourself, what am I really chasing? What need is driving this desire? Is this purchase solving a problem or performing a fantasy? And most importantly, am I trying to feel something I didn't get to feel when I needed it most? Because that's the pattern. Money gives you options, but desire decides what you choose. And if your desires are just echoes of past pain, then all that wealth will do is let you decorate the wound. It won't close it. So ask yourself, when you imagine being wealthy, what do you feel? Relief? Power? Revenge of escape? That feeling is the key. It's the real craving, and it's older than you think. Until you understand that, money will always be emotional gravity, pulling you toward a version of yourself that looks successful on the outside, but is still starving on the inside. Desire is a mirror, and wealth doesn't clean the glass. It just makes the reflection harder to ignore. You don't just spend money, you assign it meaning. Every dollar you move becomes a symbol, a stand-in for something you want others to see, or something you're still trying to prove to yourself. Let's call this what it is: projection. Money becomes a canvas, and most people are painting gods on it. Here's the thing nobody wants to say out loud. You already worship something. Everyone does. Whether you call it ambition, comfort, aesthetics, approval, legacy, underneath the surface, it's devotion. And money is how you fund that devotion. It's how you build the temple. Humans are natural idol makers, always have been. But in modern society, we don't carve statues out of wood, we carve self-worth out of credit limits. We don't kneel at altars, we kneel at algorithms, luxury brands, portfolio balances, and audience metrics. You might think that sounds dramatic,
But take a look at your last 10 purchases, or the last 10 financial decisions you made. What were you really buying? Peace of mind? That's security worship. An outfit that says, "I'm not like them"? That's identity worship. A gift you couldn't afford just to win someone over? That's love worship, dressed up as generosity. Worship isn't about belief. It's about behavior. And nothing reveals your behavior faster than your bank account. Money isn't neutral. It's spiritual. Not in a fluffy, manifest your destiny way, in a cold, psychological sense. Because every time you use it, you're amplifying something inside you, an obsession, a fear, a longing, a delusion. And the more money you have, the louder it gets. Let's talk about externalization. It's the psychological process where you take something internal, an emotion, a desire, a belief, and you project it outward onto something tangible. This is what happens when people get rich and suddenly feel validated. The money didn't give them worth. It just mirrored back the fantasy they'd already been carrying. That's why wealth can feel like power, even when it's not, because you're no longer just surviving, you're constructing a personal myth. And myths are sticky. They're hard to question, especially when other people start believing in yours. Suddenly, you're not just a person who made money, you're someone who deserves it, someone with better instincts, someone who knew before others did, someone whose choices should now be listened to, copied, revered. That's the idol factory in action. But here's the problem. When your identity is built on money, or on the image money allows you to project, you stop being a person. You become a performance. And performances are exhausting. You'll notice this in people who can't stop talking about their investments, their wins, their income, their business. It's not just pride, it's self-preservation. They need the feedback loop. They need the worship, because without it, they don't know who they are. Projection isn't just about what you show others. It's about what you're hiding from yourself. This shows up in how people criticize others too. A rich man mocks poor people for not working hard enough. What he's really doing is purging his own fear of becoming irrelevant. A woman calls luxury tacky, but obsesses over minimalist design. What she's really doing is protecting her sense of taste as identity. It's all spiritual warfare, dressed in capitalism. And the most common idol? Control. Control is the unspoken currency of modern wealth. People want financial freedom, sure, but what they really want is to stop being told no, to stop feeling powerless, to have their will become law. You see this in the rise of entrepreneurs who glorify freedom but live in prisons of their own productivity, or in the obsession with FIRE, financial independence, retire early, that for some isn't about peace, it's about winning, beating the system, escaping the herd. But here's the paradox. The more you build your identity around control, the more fragile you become. Because the moment the market dips, the moment the business slows, the moment the metrics fall, so does your self-worth. Worshipping control turns you into a paranoid god, always scanning for threats, always needing more power to feel safe. Money is just the altar. Here's where things get even messier. When you project identity onto money, you also start projecting judgment. You decide who's worthy based on how much they earn, how they spend, how they dress, how they tip. You build a personal religion and then punish others for not following it. This is where financial superiority hides. Not in tax brackets, in subtle glances, in online comments, in dinner table conversations where someone says, "Well, if they'd just worked harder." It's not about the money.
It's about the worship of a system that made you feel chosen. And this goes both ways. Poor people worship money too, because they're starving. Because when you've been deprived, the thing you lack starts to glow. You fantasize about being rich, but it's not about the objects, it's about the feeling, the transformation, the becoming. And that's the most seductive part of the projection game. It promises transcendence, that you can finally be loved, or free, or safe, or envied, or seen. But transcendence built on symbols will always collapse, because you're worshiping a mirror, not a god. You want to know what someone really believes? Watch what they protect, what they fight over, what they feel humiliated by, what they're terrified of losing. That's where the real idol is. And if you've never questioned it, chances are you're bowing to it. You can have wealth without worship, but it requires brutal honesty. You have to ask, what am I projecting onto this money? What version of myself am I trying to feed? And is that version even real? Because if it's not, then no amount of income, status, or luxury will save you from the quiet truth. You didn't build a life. You built a shrine.
The money beliefs you live by, the ones you think are rational, moral, even universal, probably aren't yours. They're hand-me-downs, family scripts, cultural downloads, trauma echoes disguised as logic. Let's start there. Almost every adult is walking around with an inherited financial nervous system. Some grew up hearing money doesn't grow on trees. Others got told, just focus on your passion and the money will come. Some watched their parents argue about debt in whispers. Others saw wealth weaponized, used to manipulate, dominate, or disappear. The stories we grow up with become the beliefs we live by, until they start bleeding. It happens in moments you don't even notice. You get a job offer, it's 10K more, but you immediately feel unworthy, or like you have to prove you're worth it. That's not logic. That's conditioning. You see a friend post about a luxury vacation and instantly feel two things at once, envy and disgust. That's not personality. That's an inherited money wound, jealousy of freedom, plus a value judgment passed down from someone who taught you rich people are shallow. It's all inside you, and it didn't start with you. Think of your mind like a financial operating system, installed by other people, optimized through survival, and rarely updated. If you were raised in scarcity, you probably learned hypervigilance, spend now or lose it forever. If you were raised in financial chaos, you may have adopted control. I must plan every cent or I'll die. If you saw money weaponized, used to dominate a partner, humiliate a sibling, or destroy a relationship, you probably fear it without even realizing you do. That fear shapes your behavior, quietly, systematically. You'll undercharge for your services because I don't want to be greedy. You'll avoid investing because what if I mess up? You'll stay in dead-end jobs because stability matters more than risk. And you'll convince yourself this is just who you are. It's not. It's a mask you inherited and forgot to take off. Let's go deeper. Unexamined financial beliefs often masquerade as morality. We confuse generational trauma with wisdom. Someone once told you debt is evil. So now you avoid any leverage, even the kind that could grow your life, because it feels wrong. Or you were taught that talking about money is rude, so now you stay silent while being underpaid. But who gave you those rules? Who benefits from you obeying them? These aren't rhetorical questions. They're survival questions. Because financial shame is one of the fastest ways to keep people small, keep them quiet, keep them obedient. And shame rarely originates with the individual. It's passed down, layered, reinforced. Wealth isn't just inherited in dollars. It's inherited in beliefs.
And most of them are booby-trapped. Here's a brutal truth. Your parents didn't know what they were doing either. They didn't sit you down and say, here's how we project our fears onto money. They modeled behavior. You absorbed it. They stressed over bills. You learned that adulthood equals anxiety. They snapped at you when you asked for something. You learned that desire equals guilt. Nobody teaches kids how to build a healthy money identity. They just teach them to survive. And survival isn't the same thing as clarity. So now you're an adult. Maybe you got a steady income. Maybe not. Maybe you've built something for yourself. Maybe not yet. But underneath it all, your financial decisions are still being filtered through beliefs that were installed before you were conscious. You're not spending money. You're reliving a script. You're not rejecting opportunities. You're obeying an invisible fear. And you're not bad at money. You're just stuck in a belief system that never belonged to you. Let's pause and flip this. Ask yourself, where did your money beliefs come from? Really? Was your mother constantly stressed about money? Did your father act like he was superior because he earned more? Did your teachers praise hard work but never teach wealth building? Did your religion subtly or overtly shame materialism while secretly equating poverty with virtue? These roots matter, because if you don't pull them up, they keep growing. You'll become the adult who repeats the same patterns and calls it wisdom. You'll judge yourself for not investing, but never question your learned fear of risk. You'll feel shame when you earn more because you grew up watching relatives get resented for success. You'll stay small, quiet, financially repressed, and call it humble. It's not humility. It's inherited fear. And inherited fear doesn't just show up in personal choices. It shows up in culture. Entire communities are built around scarcity beliefs. Cultures that equate success with betrayal, where standing out is dangerous, where earning more is selling out, where financial literacy is mocked as being too ambitious or thinking you're better than us. These are not quirks. They are chains, and they get passed down like heirlooms. Now let's go internal. There's something psychologists call learned helplessness. It's when someone stops trying because past failure conditioned them to believe nothing works. Even when options open up, they freeze because their internal model says, why bother? That's how financial trauma works too, especially generational. You grow up seeing hard work not pay off, or seeing people grind their entire lives and still struggle. So even when you have a shot, an idea, an opportunity, a lucky break, you self-sabotage. You freeze, not because you're lazy, but because you don't believe in escape. You've learned to stay in the cage, even when the doors open. That's the cost of inheritance no one talks about. Not just poverty of wealth, poverty of belief, poverty of identity. You don't need a financial plan if your nervous system is still wired for panic. You don't need an investing strategy if your self-concept is still rooted in lack. You need to rebuild your money identity from scratch. Start here. What do I believe about wealth, and who gave me that belief? When I say I'm not good with money, whose voice is that? When I imagine having financial peace, what part of me gets anxious? These aren't cute journal prompts. They're extraction tools. You dig up the root, you stop the cycle, and then finally, you start choosing money behaviors that reflect you, not the ghost of who raised you. Your inheritance was fear, but your legacy doesn't have to be.
Some people don't chase money for comfort. They chase it to become someone else. Not richer, not freer, different, more respected, less judged, finally seen. This is where money stops being a tool and starts becoming a mask, and the pursuit of wealth quietly turns into self-erasure. Let's make that real. A kid grows up always feeling like he's not enough. Maybe it's his looks, his body, his background, his grades.
He tells himself, one day I'll be rich and they'll have to respect me. Not love, respect. He's not building wealth, he's building armor. And every cent he earns gets poured into an identity that slowly suffocates him. That's not freedom. That's revenge cosplaying as ambition. But this story plays out everywhere. People who feel invisible try to become powerful. People who feel powerless try to become rich. People who feel unloved try to become admired. And money becomes the perfect stage. But here's the catch. It's not really you performing. It's the version of you you think will finally be safe. The version that wins. The version that never gets mocked. The version that walks into a room and doesn't flinch. Sounds empowering, until you realize you're not actually living. You're curating, editing, selling, performing. And eventually, you forget who was underneath all that. This is the quiet death of the self. It's not loud. It doesn't look like crisis. It looks like success. Promotions, hustle, branding, respect, people calling you driven or inspiring. But underneath that applause is a person who hasn't exhaled in 10 years, who doesn't know if they'd be liked without the income, who's terrified to stop because slowing down means remembering what they were running from. Let's call it what it is, a grief machine. Because the person you could have been, the real you, gets buried under performance, slowly, elegantly, and the culture will reward you for it. Call it growth, call it legacy, call it leadership. But the truth is darker. You became someone else to earn the love that was denied to you. You just used money to make it look beautiful. And that's the problem. Wealth as identity is addictive because when it works, it really works. People treat you differently. You get doors opened, rules bent, apologies offered. But you don't even notice when you start expecting it. When your empathy shrinks. When you stop remembering what it felt like to need help, to be unsure, to not have leverage. The performance becomes reality, and then the reality becomes a prison. You can't show weakness, you can't ask for help, you can't risk looking small. You've built an identity where you're always competent, always strategic, always ahead. But now you're trapped inside that myth. You're the rich one, the one who made it, the one who should know better. So you keep performing, even when it hurts. Even when the mask digs into your skin. What happens when success becomes a survival strategy? You start mistaking exhaustion for fulfillment. You start thinking burnout is a feature, not a bug. You start calling isolation independence. This isn't theory, it's lived by millions. The entrepreneur who works 16-hour days, terrified to lose momentum. The career star who can't tell their friends they're drowning. The high achiever who built everything except an internal sense of enoughness. Money was supposed to set them free, but freedom without self-knowledge is just a prettier cage. Here's the real cost. You lose intimacy. You lose rest. You lose parts of yourself so slowly that by the time you notice, there's no map back. Because the longer you perform a version of yourself, the harder it becomes to return to the real one. And eventually, even your silence feels like lying. Let's talk about ambition. There's healthy ambition, rooted in curiosity, impact, expression. And then there's survival ambition, rooted in shame, fear, and proving. When your ambition is survival-coded, you don't chase goals, you chase oxygen. And even when you win, you don't feel peace. You feel relief. Temporary. Fleeting. And then the hunger returns. It always does. Because no amount of external proof can fill the hole left by internal erasure. You don't need to quit your job or burn your business to the ground. That's not what this is about. What this is about is honesty. Not the kind you post on social media, the kind that happens in dark rooms, when no one's watching. Ask yourself, if I lost all my money tomorrow, who would I be? If nobody admired me for what I built, would I still want it? If I wasn't scared of being ordinary, would I still be this busy? Because sometimes what looks like success is really a eulogy, not a failure, of self-abandonment. You gave up being real so you could be respected. You gave up being whole so you could be seen. And the saddest part? Nobody asked you to, but someone did teach you to. Maybe not in words, maybe in glances, silences, cultural scripts. And now you're building a life that makes sense on paper, but feels foreign in your chest. That's what happens when wealth becomes a stand-in for identity. You don't own it. It owns you. So what now? You start subtracting, peeling back, listening for the parts of you that got buried under success. You ask yourself not just what you want, but who's asking? Because if the voice asking for money is just an echo of childhood rejection, then the life you build will always feel like someone else's. There's nothing wrong with building wealth, but if you have to erase yourself to earn it, the price was too high.
Here's the part nobody wants to hear. Your bank account is a confession booth. Every purchase, every investment, every refusal to spend, it's all a record of what you believe about yourself and the world. Some people hoard money like it's armor. Others burn through it like it's proof they're alive. Some give it away to feel worthy. Some chase it to outrun shame. Most don't realize they're doing any of this because money isn't just a neutral tool. It's a projection screen. Whatever stories you haven't resolved, money amplifies them. If you're terrified of abandonment, you'll use money to control relationships. If you grew up invisible, you'll buy visibility. If you feel broken, you'll spend to signal you're whole. And if you feel powerless, you'll worship money like it's a god. It's never really about the dollars. It's about what you think they can fix. But here's the twist. Money can't fix the internal war. It can only fund it. Until you confront what you worship, you'll keep calling it success and wonder why it still doesn't feel like freedom.